Grant Thornton has been just a true champ for us. They sponsored our first event in Chicago. They're sponsoring another event in Chicago and here in New York, and I'm just so grateful that they're stepping up. And Patricia Cummings is going to introduce the panel.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2011 Entrepreneurial Bash. Grant Thornton is very happy to be here and to sponsor this fine event. Grant Thornton serves entrepreneurial companies in New York, around the U.S., and actually around the globe, and this is exactly the space that we operate in. So our panel this evening is a group of world-class founders who started from scratch and blazed a trail of success, so I'm sure we're all very interested in hearing their little tidbits and their secrets to success. Our moderator is Bob Jordan, who's the author of How They Did It, Billion-Dollar Insights from the Heart of America. And our panelists, Bonnie Baskin, founder, AppTech Laboratory Services, Glenn Tolman, co-founder, Extended Care Information Network and CEO of Allscripts, Jim Dolan, founder, The Dolan Companies, Mark Tebbe, founder, Answers.com, Lante Corporation, and last but not least, Al Burning, CEO, Hardcore Computer, and founder of PemStar. Please welcome Bob and all of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm going to dive right in here. And our goal here is to get some great advice and inspiration from the panel, and then to have some time for some questions as well. For starters, I'd just like for each one of you to tell us a little bit about how you got started in your particular companies. And the thing I'd like you to think about as well is what that original inspiration was that caused you to take a leap. You know, there's the security of working for someone else, and then there's that point where you decide you're going to do it on your own, and I'm curious what that point was for you. So if you can start, just tell us a little about yourself. Al Burning?
Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate everyone being here, and I'm thrilled to be here to participate in the process. In our case, it was actually pretty simple. We're a group of folks that were working at IBM in Rochester, Minnesota. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s, and the outsourcing trend was starting, and it was obvious that there was going to be less work than the skill that we had available to us, and we collectively got together and started looking at how we could keep the team intact and kind of shift the focus from working inside of IBM to creating an independent company. So that was kind of the tipping point, if you will, of creating an opportunity and a platform that made sense to go forward with. And it worked out well.
Jim, how about you? You had a solid career in investment banking and decided to go off on your own.
Well, I was a recovering journalist. I had worked for a news corporation for Rupert Murdoch for a number of years as a reporter, as an editor, and I wound up on his corporate staff in New York the last few years I was with him. And you sort of catch the virus when you work around somebody like Rupert, and I kept thinking I can do this too. And so I left News Corporation and proved quickly I couldn't do it, and lost a fair amount of money. Went and got a job, paid everybody back, went and tried it again, got a little closer to success that time, but still wound up owing some money, got another job, that time on Wall Street, and the third try was this company. So I found an investment group in the Twin Cities. Actually, they found me. And we decided to form a company together without knowing what to do. So it was their money and my experience and lots of mistakes from me, and we searched the country and found something that looked like the right kind of opportunity, which was local business information, typically print publishing at the time in 1992. And that's how we started this company. So they actually incorporated the company using my name, sent me the stock certificates and proof that there was money in the bank to fund the search. So I left a Wall Street partnership, went hunting, and we're now $340 million in revenues. We've done 76 acquisitions, 10 divestitures. We're public now. So this time it worked, but it took 3 tries.
Thanks, Jim. Bonnie, you were a research scientist at the time of starting your first company.
Right. So I think really my decision to start my own company was really much more about what I didn't want to do than what I wanted to do. And I think it all goes back to my first semester in college. I was convinced I wanted to be a marine biologist after reading some wonderful books in high school. Went to the University of Miami for their marine biology program. First semester, first time out on this boat in Biscayne Bay in Miami, and I became sick as a dog. So I determined at that time, and that was really rather prescient in terms of many decisions following, that the water was not in my future, and that I wanted to find something that was way more landlocked, which wound up being microbiology. And I went ahead, and as Bob said, I was a research scientist, a PhD, NIH postdoctoral fellowship, got a job, the only job that I had, other than starting my own company, working for a professor at the University of Minnesota. And I didn't like that either. So I left, and that was really the impetus for starting my first company.
Thanks, Bonnie. So Glenn, I want to talk a little further on about Allscripts, but in terms of your more entrepreneurial experience with ESON, maybe that for starters, what that was like.
Sure. Well, I guess I'd start by saying I didn't get sick at sea, but I'm a social anthropologist by training. I lived with the Amish, and then I lived with some African tribes, and so that did qualify me to run software companies. And I've really spent my career trying to figure out how to explain that training with software, and ultimately I concluded that software is really about change. And so getting people to use it is the tough part, developing it is really the easy part. At Extended Care, we had, that one was kind of interesting because it wasn't the start, but I was asked to join a board, and I went to my first board meeting, and they said, we'd like you to be chairman, and I was feeling pretty good about that. And they said, I said, well, I'd like to learn a little more about the company, but I'd be happy to be chairman. They said, one area we have is salary. We have an issue with salary. I said, well, we use different salary administration systems. We use ADP. No, we can't make salary. We can't pay the bills. And so we actually need funding. We were hoping you could provide it. And the second piece of that was we don't have the right CEO. So that was my first introduction to ESON. And then I brought in Jeff Surges, who had worked for me twice before, to run it. And then ultimately, we just crafted a business out of the assets they had. And I think that's kind of what we've done, is we've tried things, and if they didn't work, we tried things again, and hopefully didn't run out of money before we find something that worked. So that's kind of how we got started there.
Thanks, Glenn. Mark, how about your first experience with Lante Corporation?
I actually used to work for I came out of college like most good college students, wanted a really stable job, and I went to work for Arthur Andersen & Company. Back when it truly was Arthur Andersen & Company, pre-split, pre-everything, pre-Accenture. And I thought, I had a great job because I was in the consulting division, which is really made for people with really short attention spans. Because you end up on a project all the time doing different types of things. You never have the routine kind of job. It was really great. But I had started there as an intern, and I worked on microcomputers. This was back in 1982. And I actually worked on spreadsheets for Arthur Andersen, modeling the partnership. Back when spreadsheets were first coming out, I remember that summer I got to go up and meet Mitch Kapoor, and there were about 1, 2, 3, and really was one of the very first people to develop applications, if you can think of it as such, on a spreadsheet. And one of which was the modeling of the Arthur Andersen units worldwide, so they could begin to say, if we bring this many people up as partners, how would it change the overall allocation? How many units will we have to add? What's the accretive, value to it? Blah blah blah. And I loved working on microcomputers, so I was firmly convinced that that's what I wanted to do. And furthermore, I was firmly convinced that microcomputers in a business could really change the way people had done business, because it would brought the computing power to the person so they can make more immediate decisions with information that was very difficult to gather. It was all good with that. I went to work for Arthur Andersen, I was in world headquarters. I was like, at the time, the second lead of their microcomputer practice group worldwide. Sounded great. I was 22 at the time. I was having a great time. And then I came in for my review, having been there a year and a half, of course, also being there my internship and working most of my senior year, thinking, I am going to get promoted to senior consultant. So I came in feeling good. Partner sat me down and explained to me how I was doing a great job. People really liked what I was doing. However, he couldn't promote me because I had no, quote, line experience. And so I was like, what does that mean? He said, well, you got to basically quit playing with those toy computers and get into like a real computer. This year, we're going to give you an application. You can work on a mainframe application and be part of an overall team. I said, no, I really like this stuff. And that's when he told me a very prophetic line, which I constantly go back and reminded him whenever I do see him, was that the best application you can put on a microcomputer is a terminal emulator. And then connected to a mainframe, that's where the money was going to be. Well, I quit that day. I was in my review and I said, I can't work here. We obviously don't see eye to eye. I was 22 years old. My wife was working, but I wasn't. And I said, I'm going to start a consulting business focused purely on microcomputers. And that was in 1984 when I started that business. And I ran that business basically until we sold it in 2004. And throughout the way. But for me, it was belief in what that concept was. Even though there wasn't a marketplace for it, we were one of the very first microcomputer consulting firms in the country. We had done work for a lot of other businesses, helping them. You know, it was the true entrepreneurial spirit. Work by day, you know, making phone calls, and then do the work at night, doing the work that we just sold during the day so our staff could do it. And there's all kinds of stories about that. But you know, what I really learned was if you believe in what you see, and you're committed to it, you can eventually, you know, stick with it and find the path. It'll work. And by the time we sold, we had got into a lot of different waves. It was, you know, microcomputers, then databases, then local area networks, then local area network databases, then client server, then back-end infrastructure, and finally we got to websites. And websites is when it all came together. We built some of the world's largest websites that are still in use today. American Airlines, Charles Schwab, Microsoft.com, Dell.com, Epicurious here in New York. It's a great site. And basically built all kinds of cool sites for companies, really opening them up to the web. And then on that is when we went public. Then after the tech crash, we went private. And then then I took that money that we had left over and I bought 5 of my 7 competitors, consolidated them together, sold half off over here, half over there, and I was done with that part of the chapter.
You're all in different industries. The thing that you share, and you know what I find endlessly fascinating is the ability to take something from nothing and to make it truly significant, where so many other companies could not do this. This is my one crass moment in the program where I am going to single you out because you wouldn't do it yourselves. Mark, in your case, you know, an IT consulting company, those are legion. Yet you took Lante to an IPO evaluation in the billions, 700 employees. Glenn, you took Eason from a little thing that sold for 100 million. Bonnie, Viromed and Aptech, 200 million. Jim, IPO valuation of 400 million. Al, you spun off and started on your own, and that was 300 million for Pemstar. So my burning question, and I'll bet some people here share it, is how did you do that? Al, how did you took a team of 6 or 7 of your friends, and now you're sitting together, and how do you get from there to what Pemstar did?
Well, first point, you said the burning question. All my answers are burning.
They're all
answers.
burning. Yes, okay.
Al burning. But you hit the nail on the head with, there was 6 or 7 of us. It was a team. And one of the things I experienced both working at IBM and then Pemstar and then our current company, Hardcore Computer, it is all about the team. And in our case, we couldn't have accomplished what we accomplished without the team. Or, you know, there were 7 or 8 founders, and everybody brought something unique to the table. Everybody contributed unbelievably, and collectively working together, we were able to accomplish great things. And then quickly replicate that team to several hundred within a matter of a year, and then several thousand after a couple of years. And so yeah, so the one big ingredient was, you know, it was the right team to start out with, and then capturing a culture that we could then, you know, attract other people into the team and be able to do good things from a design standpoint, fast ramp up, and do business around the world.
One of the amazing things that your team did, does anyone know Given Imaging, what they do? It's the pill, the camera that you swallow, takes 50,000 shots. You did all the design work on that?
Did design work and the robots to build the Given Imaging capsule. And one of the fun things about the Pemstar, we were an independent design and manufacturing firm, so we're able to get involved in a lot of fun projects. Given Imaging was one. The Keurig coffee maker, which we did some of the original design work with Keurig, and there's a host of other projects. We did the first coated stent for J&J Cordis, which in the U.S. that was done in volume. So we had a great team that could solve tough problems on design and manufacturing, and then it resulted in being able to build those products around the world.
So Jim, your challenge now is that we need an answer that does not include team. And so how did you do that, where you just started with an investment fund, but from scratch?
Pure ego. Ego. I mean, I found a category of publishing that I thought was undermanaged and underled, and it was very, very profitable, but it was mostly small little units around the country that were not aggregated in any meaningful way, 600 of them around the country, mostly mom and pops, third and fourth generation. And I'd been a publishing executive, I'd been a publishing manager, I knew how to manage these things better. And the problem is each one is so small it can't support much of a management team. But we bought the first one for a below market, and I spent a year running it and learning what it took to grow it, what the mistakes were, tried to get those out of the way early. I do that very well, I'm a great mistakes guy. And then we began to buy more of them and to aggregate them under a single management team. And I can't do it all alone, there's no question about that, but I think the starting idea started with one person, with really me and my ego. And if I could interrupt the train of thought for 1 second, our enterprise value was at one point $800 million. Now, sadly, it's $500 million, but there's just a higher number than you said.
Very good.
I'm always selling, you understand. So I'm telling you.
I'm glad to hear it's higher.
Okay,
I like
okay,
higher numbers. Bonnie, how about in your case?
So I'd have to agree with a team and I suppose a little bit of ego. But for me, I think it all starts before all of that. I think it really starts with the value proposition of the business. You can have a great team, you can have an ego, but if you don't have a product or service that's a value, and the way that you define value is that somebody wants to pay for it, then it makes no difference. So you really have to understand what the value proposition is, what the business strategy of this is, and to be successful and to keep the doors open, it has to be a viable business from the start.
Glenn, what was the key with Eason that got it?
We were saying that we've got the toughest sitting at the end. Mark is
nothing's left yet.
So I'll say two things. And
Putting Mark in that position makes me happy, though, because you see, he made me lose a heartbeat this morning when you all think I email you too much with details and all that, and I email Mark just to remind him about being here, and he emails me back that he's not here and won't be on the panel, essentially. But here he is. Sorry, go on.
No, that's, so I'd actually say two things. One, and I won't focus on Eason because that's actually the smallest one that we did. So if you look at all the businesses today, and I've been fortunate to run 3 public companies now, and I have a venture fund, and we're making investments, and it's all about trends. So we bet on trends because, frankly, it doesn't matter how good your team is or anything else. If you're a salmon swimming upstream, it's really tough. But if you get behind the right trend, then the world kind of pushes you ahead. So, for example, Allscripts is all about electronic healthcare, electronic health records, and the like. And, as people talk about our company, our biggest challenge now is hiring and executing. But, we have a $30 billion stimulus that's kind of pushing behind us. And the bet was 12 years ago, is the world going to stay paper in healthcare or is it going to go electronic? And when we first started in electronic prescribing, it was an uphill battle, office by office. But I had a sense that it can't be that healthcare is the last bastion of paper in the world. And now today, much longer than we thought. But we look for trends. So in our venture fund, we're looking at healthcare, we're looking at education, and we're looking at solar. And our view is that other than those three, nothing really matters, because if you don't get those right, for sure the United States isn't going to continue to be a leader if we don't solve healthcare, if we don't solve education, if we don't solve energy. And so if you get behind, get behind the right tidal wave, it's going to push everybody forward, even if you're not that good. The second piece of that is kind of the opposite of ego, and that is humility. And that's especially true when you're doing more than one company, because you can get lucky and find a great idea and go forward. But when you go to do your second company, you really got to be humble, because if you take companies public and you're at the top and then you sell the company, you're feeling really good. And then you go to start a new one, you go from staying in the Four Seasons back to Motel 6. And you got to be prepared to do that. And most entrepreneurs aren't. And the biggest part of that is when someone says, your idea is terrible, but here's one we pay for, you have to say, that's our new idea right there. And so you can't, the sense of ego, which I agree in a sense, every CEO has to have some, but the flip side of that is you can't get tied to something that you think is your own. What's your own is understanding what clients want. And especially today, as the market moves so quickly, we have to be willing to throw out what we just loved and move to what's next. And it's very tough to do, because that's a self-renewal process that doesn't come naturally. Because you were just in telling them how wonderful this is, now you say there's something better. So I'd say two things. One, figure out where the world is going. There's this great Kafka saying, in a fight between you and the world, bet on the world. And so we try to say, where are the trends going? Let's just get ahead of those trends. And second, and by the way, it's not that hard to do. And second, make sure that you have sufficient humility to say your customer knows better than you do in most cases.
Glenn, the current issue of Business Week, big article on electronic medical records. It singled out Allscripts and Cerner as winners. And there was a private equity fund that said their estimate was 750 new entrants medical records, and most of them were going to go by the wayside.
Yeah. Well, we think, what's happened in electronic health records is there's a lot of new entrants, but it's now started to get so complex that we think it'll be between 3 and 5 within the next 36 months. So we see dramatic consolidation. We, of course, have been leading some of that with our last year. We acquired Clipsys Corporation for $1.3 billion. And, we've indicated that we're going to continue to look for technology that makes sense in the market. But I think to do what you now need to do to secure this information, to connect it all together, to have sufficient technology. When all of you see a new phone or a new iPad, you think it's great. When I see it, I say it's $150,000. That's what it costs for each new device to bring it online to test it, just so somebody can pull up our apps on it. And at that rate, it's very tough to enter the market. Now, that said, healthcare is, someone said recently to me, they were really down, and they said, this is the beginning of the end in healthcare. Everything's getting worse. And I look at it the other way, to kind of paraphrase the Churchill saying, this is the end of the beginning. And this is like when we all received our first computers, we all said this is great, and people said it's going to eliminate paper. And the next 10 years, the paper industry, we all should have invested. It went like this, and the best category was computer paper, fastest growing category in paper. But then after 10 years, just about 5 years ago, we started to connect those computers together. And when we did, you saw this eruption of new value, new businesses, collaboration, creativity. And that's what we're going to see now in healthcare, because as healthcare gets electronic and gets connected, there's going to be a million different apps that come out about things you can do. And so it's a great space to be in. It's just this base technology is probably not, the operating system, so to speak, is probably not the best place. But the innovation that's going to sit on top of it, we have more than 100 companies developing on our platform now, because we know we can't possibly do it all. And so we'll do what Apple did, and that is we'll be the base operating system.
Mark, how about you? Back to the question, how does a guy starting a consulting company get to, was it 700 employees?
1,200.
How
But I
do you
wasn't
do
going
that?
to correct you.
Huh?
I wasn't going to correct you, but it was 1,200. 14 offices, 3 continents. But all right. So it's funny because Glenn was right. I mean, they started, and I'm like, I'm like, he's.
I could have,
I am
if you
so
really,
screwed.
if you really wanted me to stroke your ego, I could say, how does somebody get to be friends with Bill Gates
That doesn't
and
matter.
Michael Dell?
So let's go through it. Okay, so team.
don't want to talk about
you
that.
know.
Okay.
So team, I did not do it alone in any stretch of the imagination. I think team is excessively important. So I'm going to recap so we can cover it together. And I think the best thing I ever did was hire people way smarter than me. Okay? Next was ego. And I totally agree. You have to, and not ego to be boisterous and the like, but to basically recap and really believe in what you're doing. Because a lot of times people are going to say what you're doing is wrong because they don't have the same conviction and vision that you have. And I know, being in the technology industry, every new item that came out, every new device, every new trend was going to just wipe everything else away. Not quite the case, but it was going to change what we had done. And so we always were reinventing ourselves, which I thought I was going to go with, follow trends and reinvent myself, but Glenn took that one. Then we've got the, to basically, be able to go out and really believe and grow yourself. And I do believe that. And then Glenn's trends, I think, is spot on. Having been in the technology industry for 20 years and grown all throughout it, and been able to be, as Bob alluded to, we were the only consulting firm to do work for all 4 of Bill Gates' companies. Microsoft, his personal investment company, Cascade, as well as the Photoshop Corpus, as well as his foundation. And be able to do those type of things, and constantly with leading edges, we won Partner of the Year one time from both IBM, Lotus, and Microsoft all in the same year. Which again, they told us straight up, once we won one, you're not going to win the others, but the results spoke for themselves. It really is a situation where you have to be open-minded. And so I was going to go with trends, lost that at the last minute, because I do believe you have to be able to take an honest assessment of what's happening in the industry, pick something you believe in, and believe in it, whatever that may be, but be open-minded. So my point would be, and it builds a little bit off the humbleness, is to basically be prepared to say you're wrong. And more importantly, listen to your customers. Bonnie said how important the customers are. Bottom line, you cannot invest enough in your business to keep it alive. Your investment for your business comes from your customers. So if your customers are telling you that you're doing a great job except for this, this, and this, listen to them. Take you back, challenge your team, and say, how can we do this, this, and this even better? Or better yet, think out of the box. If you guys were going off to start a new business and your goal was to destroy us in this area, what would you do? And challenge that team. Remember, in the recap, you've hired a smart team. You really believe in them. You have a common culture. You have a common core sets of values that you build off for your organization. Challenge them to think out of the box and figure out how to destroy your business and then make those changes yourself before an external company comes and destroys your business for you. Because if you destroy your own business, you'll grow. So as when I went through the cycles of what Lante went through over the 20 years of business, there were constant changes. We had a lot of debates about were we doing the right thing, but we made the commitment time after time. We were wrong sometimes. I was fundamentally convinced that pen-based computing was going to be a huge trend. We were the largest developer of one of the very first planned computer companies, which was called Go Systems. And then there became part of, and then there was another one called Grid. I firmly was convinced of it. Today it still isn't there. But I was so convinced of it back in the mid-90s that we put a lot of resources into it. We were wrong. But we were quick enough and nimble enough to basically say we need to readjust and rethink that. And I think to have the open-mindedness, and it's a delicate balance. It's a balance between the conviction of what you believe in and what you see and sticking with it for long enough to be successful, but also listening to what the market feedback is. Ideally from your customers, and then secondly from your competitors. The old Sun Tzu claim, keep your friends close but your enemies closer. I knew every one of my competitors by name. I knew their top management. I knew all of those people straight up. And I got to know them a little bit better when websites first came out. Because again, believing in where it was, we were firmly convinced that the web was something big when we first started getting into it in 92, 93 timeframe. And so what I did was I bought up all the domains of my competitors. And also some large customers. And I went to the customer and said, this is a thing you might want to do. and we'd be more glad to do it for you. We never held the domains hostage, let's be clear on that, except for my competitors. I bought every one of my competitors' domains. And when they found out, they're like, we're going to sue you. I'm like, over what? There's no case law here. And, but what I did do is I got a non-compete from each one of them that they couldn't hire any of my employees for 5 years after I donated it to them. So it worked out really well. Because we were early in the cycle of it, so from literally 93, 94 to 98, 99, none of my competitors could hire any of my employees because I had their domains. And I let them all have them in return for that contract.